Please just listen to me.
Ah! Get away from me! I'm not going anywhere with you!
Don't do this, please. I can't lose you too. Let go of her hand. We have to go right now.
No, I am not leaving her.
Please don't take her away from me.
She looked me dead in the eye on her 18th birthday and said, "You're not my mother. You never were." And Lord, something inside me just crumbled. Dear listeners, I am glad to welcome you. If this story touches the strings of your soul, please support our channel. Subscribe, hit the like button, and be sure to write in the comments which states or country you are listening from. I remember the way her voice echoed in that quiet kitchen. The air smelled of the lemon cake I'd baked, her favorite since she was 6, and the candles were still flickering behind her like tiny suns. But she wasn't looking at the cake. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at a manila folder she had just pulled from the drawer I always kept locked, a drawer that held the last pieces of my sister. And right there, in that soft pause between her breath and mine, I felt a coldness move through my bones that no autumn wind could ever match. You know, people talk about heartbreak like it's some kind of sharp, explosive pain. But real heartbreak, the kind that rearranges your soul, it's quiet, like the settling of dust after something precious breaks on the floor. She was my girl, my baby, the child I held through fevers, through nightmares, through scraped knees and schoolyard bullies. And yet, at that moment, she looked at me like I was a stranger. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to when life felt almost ordinary. Back before secrets started leaking out of the walls like slow, poisoned water. Back before I learned how fragile motherhood can look on paper, even when it feels iron-strong in the heart. If you'd stepped into my home 10 years ago, you might have thought it was the picture of quiet, everyday living. I lived in a small house on the east side of town, a place with soft yellow siding, and a porch swing that squeaked no matter how much oil I used. My kitchen was always cluttered in that lived-in but loved way. Flour dusting the counter, mismatched mugs drying on a towel, a radio humming gospel or old soul music in the background. And in the middle of that warm little world was her, my niece, Lily. But to me, she wasn't my niece, not in the ways that mattered. She was the child I rocked against my chest the night my sister, her mother, left this world. She was the reason I got up every morning, even when grief made my limbs feel heavy as wet sand. She had these big brown eyes, wide like she was always searching for something familiar, something steady. And I tried. Lord knows I tried to be that steady thing. Our days had a rhythm to them. At 6:30 every morning, I'd hear the soft shuffle of her slippers against the hardwood floors. She'd come into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, hair messy and sticking up every which way, and say the same thing she said every morning. "Morning, Mommy." That word, Mommy, she didn't say it tentatively. She didn't look for my reaction. She said it like it was the truth she'd always known. And I let her. Maybe that was my first mistake, or maybe it was the only right thing I ever did. I still don't know. We lived simply. I worked long shifts as a nursing aide at the local rehab center, 12-hour days that left me smelling faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. But every evening when I unlocked my front door and heard her yell, "Mommy!" from her bedroom, something unclinched inside me. I'd make dinner, okra stew, fried catfish on Fridays, baked chicken on Sundays, and she'd sit at the counter doing her homework, swinging her legs, asking questions about the world like her mind couldn't stay still. Why do people have to die? Do you think Mama watches us from heaven? Do you think I'll ever forget her face? Those questions always hit me right in that soft place beneath the ribs, because I remembered my sister's face far too well. The tired eyes, the way she held the baby close even when she was shaking from fever, the way she whispered, "Promise me you'll take care of her, May. Promise me." I promised, and I kept that promise like it was stitched into my own heartbeat. But promises don't always protect you, not from the law, not from secrets, not from the people you love the most. Back then, though, I didn't know any of that. I just knew I had a child to raise. Lily grew up wrapped in a kind of love that was gentle and consistent. I wasn't perfect, not at all. I worked too much, worried too much, cried quietly in the laundry room after she'd gone to bed. But I was there, present, steady. Every scraped knee got a Band-Aid and a kiss. Every bad dream ended with her sleeping on my chest. Every school performance, I was in the front row with my old camcorder, even when my shift ended only 20 minutes before. She'd come home with macaroni art and small knitted bracelets she made out of leftover yarn, always saying, "I made this for you, Mommy." And I'd keep them. Every single one. We had our little rituals, too. Hot cocoa on the porch whenever it rained, a movie night every last Saturday of the month with popcorn so buttery the bowl turned translucent. And on her birthdays, I baked a lemon cake with real zest in the icing, the same recipe my sister used to make. Sometimes, when the house was very quiet, I'd look at her, really look, and feel this ache of something bittersweet. She's growing up, and every year she looks more like my sister. I tried to prepare myself for the questions I knew would come one day. But nothing prepares you for the moment the child you raised starts pulling threads out of the life you built, searching for something you didn't even realize was missing. Those gentle early years were the calm before a storm I didn't see coming. A storm that would change everything. Her future, my place in her world, even the way I understood love itself. And it all began with a single envelope, a single lie of omission, a single truth I was too afraid to face. But that part, that's coming next. If you ask me when the normal years officially ended, I'd say they lingered longer than I expected, stretching quietly into Lily's early teens, like the tail end of a long summer evening. Those were the years where everything looked steady from the outside, even if I'd sometimes wake up with a knot in my stomach I couldn't explain. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just the knowing, the deep, bone-deep knowing that secrets don't stay quiet forever. But for a while, things were peaceful. Lily grew fast, taller than most girls her age, all long limbs and quick thoughts. She had my sister's humor, sharp but warm, and something of her father too, though I never spoke his name. Not because I was hiding him, but because he hid himself long before I ever had the chance. By the time she was 12, she'd begun asking more grown-up questions, the kind that make you pause while chopping carrots at the kitchen counter. "Mommy, what was she like? My real mom?" She used that phrase occasionally, real mom, though she'd always follow it by touching my arm, almost apologizing with her fingertips. And I'd tell her what I could, how my sister loved music, how she laughed too loudly at bad jokes, how she would hold the baby with this fierceness, like she was trying to stop time with her own hands. But I always left out the parts that hurt, the sickness, the fear, the way she clutched my sleeve the night she knew she wouldn't make it. Some truths feel too heavy to place on a child's shoulders. But those early teen years, they came with a different kind of heaviness. It wasn't Lily showing the red flags. It was the situation. There were days when I'd catch myself thinking, what if she finds out everything? What if she resents me for taking a role that never belonged to me? What if love isn't enough? And then there were practical things. The paperwork that never quite matched up. The legal guardianship I'd fought for but never truly secured. The documents that expired every few years and needed signatures I didn't have. Back then, it didn't seem urgent. But life has a way of turning tiny cracks into deep, jagged breaks. Still, on the surface, things looked good. We were a team. Lily running in from school, tossing her backpack on the couch. Me stirring a pot on the stove, pretending not to see the B- on her math quiz before she hit it. Her telling me about her friends. Kayla, who always forgot her lunch. And Mia, who talked too loudly during English class. We'd sit at the table, our knees bumping lightly, and I'd try to give her the kind of guidance I wish someone had given me at that age. She was confident, bold, tender-hearted in her own quiet way, but she was also curious. And sometimes curiosity is a spark waiting for the right wind. The first real tension arrived in small moments, not arguments, not rebellion, just distance. A slight change in her tone when she talked about family tree projects, a flicker in her eyes when classmates asked about her parents, questions she'd start and then abandon halfway through, as if she didn't want to hear the answers. She'd come into the living room some evenings, sit on the edge of the couch and say, "Mommy, were you scared when she died?" I'd nod, terrified. "Did you think about not taking me?" That question always landed like a stone dropped in still water, rippling through everything inside me. "No," I'd say softly. "Not once." That was the truth, the simplest truth I had. But even truths can sound like lies when the world around you starts shifting. There's something I need to admit to you, and maybe to myself. There were documents I should have renewed, conversations with lawyers I should have followed up on, custody papers I should have fought harder for. But every time I saw the words legal guardian or temporary custody, a sharp panic rose in my throat, because temporary felt like a crack in my foundation, like someone could pull her away from me if I sneezed wrong. And deep down, I think I believed that if I didn't touch those papers, life would keep going exactly as it was. Quiet, predictable, full of tiny routines that stitched us together. But fear, it doesn't keep life steady. It just blinds you long enough for the ground to shift under your feet. By the time Lily entered high school, our relationship had softened into something almost like friendship. She was comfortable enough to tease me, bold enough to challenge my rules, and trusting enough to confide in me about almost everything. Almost. There were nights when she'd sit on her bed, legs crossed, flipping through that old family photo album. Her fingertips would glide slowly across my sister's face, across the pictures where the two of us stood together. Me holding her as a baby, me feeding her, me helping her take her first steps. She'd look up at me and say, "You look so young in these." I'd smile. I was. "You really did all of this for me, didn't you?" "I still am. Every day." She'd nod, her eyes would shine a little, and she'd lean her head on my shoulder. Those were some of the brightest moments of my life. But even bright moments cast shadows. And sometimes, shadows stretch farther than we realize. Because the closer she got to adulthood, the more restless she became, like a compass spinning near a magnet, pulled by something unseen. And one day, something happened that shifted the balance entirely. A single moment, a discovery I didn't see coming. A spark that would light the fuse on everything that came after. It all began with a missing envelope, one I thought I'd hidden well. One she found anyway. I can still see that afternoon clearly, the way the sunlight fell through the living room curtains in long golden stripes, catching dust in the air like tiny drifting stars. I remember thinking it was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a woman pause halfway through folding laundry. Lily was supposed to be upstairs, studying for her history exam, but the house had that stillness, that heaviness, that told me a child wasn't where she claimed to be. When I called her name, she didn't answer. At first, I wasn't worried. Teenagers get lost in their headphones, in their moods, in their own stormy inner worlds. But a second later, I heard the faint sound of something sliding, something wooden, a drawer. That drawer. My heart gave a slow, hard thud. It was the drawer in my bedroom, the one I kept locked, not because I didn't trust her,
but because the things in there weren't meant for her yet. The manila folder with her mother's death certificate, the envelope with the deed to my sister's old house, the photographs that still smelled like the cedar box they once lived in. The only key was supposed to be in my purse. I stepped down the hallway, quiet, careful, my breath tight in my chest, and when I reached my bedroom door, I saw her, sitting cross-legged on the floor, the locked drawer pulled wide open, papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. She looked up at me. Not guilty, not scared, just different. Her face had this puzzled, wounded look, like she'd opened a book expecting a happy ending and found something written in a language she didn't understand. "Mommy?" she said softly. That one word held everything: confusion, hope, and the beginning of a distance I didn't know how to close. I swallowed hard. "Baby, why are you in here?" She didn't answer immediately. She held up the envelope with my sister's handwriting on the front, a handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly 17 years. "This says, 'For my daughter.' Why didn't you ever give this to me?" Her voice shook, not angry, but trembling with something new, something raw. I walked slowly toward her and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands rested on my knees because they didn't know where else to go. "I was waiting," I said quietly, "waiting for when you were ready." She blinked. Ready for what? For her story. She looked back down at the papers. Old documents, hospital bills, a faded ultrasound picture, the deed to the old family home my sister never got to live in, legal papers with signatures that weren't mine. Her mouth tightened. Why didn't I know about any of this? I breathed in slowly through my nose. My heart felt like it was made of warm wax, melting under a flame. "You were too young." "But I'm 15 now." "I know." "But you still didn't tell me." Silence slid between us like a knife. Quiet, sharp, cold. I thought she'd cry, or ask more questions, or sit close to me the way she always did when life felt overwhelming. But instead, she gathered the papers into a neat pile and said, "I want to read them." Her tone wasn't defiant. It wasn't hostile. It was controlled, like she'd built a little wall around herself in the 3 minutes it took me to walk down that hallway. I nodded. "All right, but let me sit with you." She hesitated. Just a flicker. Then she shook her head. "I think I want to do it alone." That was the moment, the very first moment, I felt something shift between us. Not a break, not yet, just a hairline crack, the kind you don't notice until moisture gets inside. I stood and walked out of the room, slowly, like stepping away from something fragile. And for the next 2 hours, I stayed in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of tea I forgot to drink, listening to the faint rustle of papers upstairs. Every sound was a heartbeat. Every silence was a warning. When she finally came down, her eyes were puffy, her cheeks flushed. She wasn't crying, but she wasn't not crying either. She set the envelope on the counter. "You said she loved me, but she didn't even name me in the will." My breath caught. I'd tried so hard to shield her from that detail, how my sister had been too sick, too rushed, too overwhelmed to finish her legal papers. "She didn't have time," I said gently. "She had time to write this letter." She tapped the envelope. "She had time to sign over her house. She had time to leave messages for you." The hurt in her voice sliced clean through me. "Baby, please sit with me." But she didn't. She stepped back. I don't understand why nothing matches. Why do the papers say I'm hers, but they never mention you? Why is there no document with your name on it? Why is everything so secret?" I felt the first real fear then, a cold, hollow ache blooming right behind my ribs. I wasn't hiding anything from you. I was protecting you. That's what people say when they think I can't handle the truth. Her voice sounded older, harder. I opened my mouth, searching for something, anything that could bridge that gap between us, but Lily wasn't done. If something had happened to you, would I even be allowed to stay in this house? Would anyone recognize you as my mother? Or would they take everything? Take me? Her questions weren't wrong. They were the questions I'd pushed aside for years, hoping love alone would hold back the tide of legal reality. "Let's talk to a lawyer," I said softly. She looked at me, studied me, like she was seeing me for the first time, or seeing something missing. "I'm going to my room," she said. Then she turned and walked away. No anger, no yelling, just distance. And the thing about distance is it grows. Not all at once, but quietly, like a rope slipping, little by little through someone's grasp until the knot finally loosens. That night after she went to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the drawer I'd tried to keep closed all those years, and I realized the truth. I wasn't afraid of losing Lily. I was afraid she'd grow up, learn the whole story, and look at me the way she had that afternoon, like I was part of the problem, like love wasn't enough, like motherhood wasn't mine.
If I had to mark the day things truly began to unravel, not just shift or crack, but unravel, it would be the day the school called me at work. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where the halls of the rehab center smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. I was helping Mr. Dunham adjust his compression socks when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me, a mother's instinct, I guess, told me I needed to. "Miss Thompson," a young voice said, "this is the front office at Hillside High. Do you have a moment?" That tone, I recognized it well. The soft, careful voice of someone stepping slowly over broken glass. "Yes, this is she. Is Lily all right?" "She's safe," the woman said quickly. "She's in our office." My knees softened a little, and I leaned against the wall. "What happened?" "Well," she sighed, "the school distributed new enrollment verification forms today. We needed updated parental documentation, and Lily said she couldn't provide what we needed." I felt a pinch behind my eyes. "What documentation?" "Proof of legal guardianship." There it was. The one thing I had avoided. The one thing love alone couldn't replace. "Miss Thompson, Lily told us you're her mother, but she couldn't find any paperwork that says so." I closed my eyes, took a breath, held it. "Is there any way you can bring those documents in?" she asked carefully. My voice was thin, stretched tight like old thread. I'll be there shortly." When I hung up, my hand trembled so badly I had to tuck it into my scrub pocket. By the time I walked into the office, Lily was sitting in a plastic chair, arms folded tight across her chest. Her foot tapped against the tile in a nervous rhythm. She didn't look up when I said her name. The front desk assistant, a woman with sharp eyebrows and a too-perfect bun, gave me the kind of smile people reserve for awkward situations. "We just need those guardianship papers, Miss Thompson." Lily's eyes flicked toward me then, just a flash, full of something that wasn't anger, but wasn't trust either. And in that moment, I realized she expected me to pull a miracle out of my purse, to prove something that wasn't on paper, but lived in every part of our life together. "I'll submit what I have," I said. The woman nodded, though her expression said she already knew it wouldn't be enough. We sat in the car for a long moment before either of us spoke. The engine hummed, the air conditioning blew soft and stale. The world felt strangely still. Finally, Lily said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I stared at the steering wheel. "Baby, I was trying to spare you confusion, pain. You were so young when what?" Her voice lifted, not loud, but sharp enough to pierce. "When everything happened," I whispered. She turned in her seat to look at me directly. Her eyes were bright, but not with tears, with frustration, with hurt. "So they're right. You're not legally my mom." My breath caught, not because she was wrong, but because she'd said it so easily, like saying the sky is blue. "I'm the only mother you've ever had. That doesn't change what's on paper." Paper. That word cut deeper than anything. "Lily, please." "No," she said quickly, swallowing hard. I thought you were being honest with me. I thought everything between us was simple." Simple. As if motherhood ever was. Before I could respond, she pulled her hand away from where mine had reached toward hers, and that tiny gesture hurt more than any shouted argument could have. Over the next weeks, the distance between us stretched further. Not dramatic, not loud, no slammed doors, no screaming, just shifts, small ones. She stayed in her room longer after school, stopped asking me to braid her hair at night like she used to, stopped sitting at the kitchen counter during dinner prep, started answering with single words. She wasn't angry. That was the hardest part. Anger I could have handled. Anger gives you something to work with. But Lily wasn't angry. She was thinking. Untangling. Pulling threads. There were moments I'd find her staring at her mother's picture, my sister laughing in a polka dot dress, like she was searching for clues, for answers, for pieces of herself I couldn't give her. And every time I walked into the room, she'd close the album quietly, politely, as if she didn't want me to see what she was feeling, as if I was suddenly on the outside of something sacred. One evening, while washing dishes, I felt her presence behind me, before she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" I set the plate down slowly. "Of course." She hesitated, her fingers tapping lightly against the counter, a habit she had when her nerves crept up. Why didn't you adopt me?" The plate slipped slightly in my hand. I gripped it tight. "Lily, sweetheart, I wanted to. I wanted to more than anything. So why didn't you?" The truth was heavy. Too heavy. "Your mother passed suddenly," I said softly. "Your father disappeared. Legally, things were complicated, messy, and I didn't have the money for attorneys back then." She stared at me, not cold, not unkind, but unreadable. "You could have told me." "I should have," I whispered. She nodded once, a small, controlled movement, then she walked away. No tears, no tremble, just that quiet, polite distance again. I started waking up before dawn, sitting at the edge of my bed, palms sweaty, mind racing with questions. What if she pulls away completely? What if she goes looking for her father? What if someone tells her I had no right to keep her? What if love isn't enough to hold her? The fear wasn't loud. It was slow and steady, like water filling the bottom of a boat, a little every day, enough that I felt myself sinking, inch by inch. And just when I thought things might settle, another moment came. A moment that would ignite everything. A tiny spark. A simple request. One that would become the start of a storm so deep, so painful, that it would change the shape of our lives. Forever. The day Lily turned 18, I woke up before sunrise, the house drenched in that quiet, hesitant light that makes everything look both familiar and strange. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint whisper of the wind against the window pane. I thought about the breakfast we used to share, the toast I always burned just a little, The way she used to tiptoe into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, calling me mommy in that soft, trusting voice. I thought about all the mornings, all the nights, all the years of scraped knees, whispered secrets, late-night homework help, and lullabies. My heart was heavy with pride, but also with this gnawing, inexplicable tension I had been feeling ever since she discovered the folder with her mother's documents. By the time she came downstairs, the house smelled faintly of burnt toast, the way it always did when I tried to make pancakes in a hurry. She was dressed carefully, almost formally, and her hair hung in sleek waves that reminded me of my sister. She didn't smile. Not yet. "Happy birthday, baby," I said softly, trying to catch her eye. She nodded, avoiding my gaze. She carried herself differently. Taller, older, but somehow heavier, like the weight of her thoughts was pressing her down. We ate in silence. The ticking of the clock in the kitchen was loud enough to drown out anything else. I wanted to ask her if she was all right, if she had a good night, if she had slept. But the words wouldn't come. I felt an invisible line between us, taut and ready to snap. Finally, she placed her fork down. The sound seemed to echo through the kitchen. "Mom," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I need something from you." I swallowed. I nodded. "Anything, baby." "I want my mother's things, the house, her belongings, everything she left behind." The words fell like stones. My chest tightened. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard I thought my knuckles might crack. "Lily," I began, my voice trembling, "those things, they were never about the money. They're memories. They're pieces of her life. I don't care about memories." Her eyes, so much like my sister's, were cold now, distant. "I want what's legally mine, and I want you to understand that you were never supposed to have it. You weren't supposed to be my mother. I don't care what you feel, I want my rights. Everything my mother left me." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the floor might slip from under me. I realized then I had been invisible all these years. In the eyes of the law, I had been nothing but a caretaker, a woman who nursed her, bathed her, raised her, but had no legal claim. Nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull her into my arms and remind her of every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every whispered "I love you" in the dark. But the words stuck in my throat. My voice faltered, trembling. I raised you, Lily," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "I fed you, loved you, protected you. I was your mother. Every day, for 17 years. I never wanted anything else. You were my world." Her expression softened for the briefest moment. I thought maybe, just maybe, she remembered something. But then she looked away, pulling the papers from the envelope she had carried upstairs earlier. Legal documents, proof, my sister's will, her property, her bank accounts. And in that instant, I realized the fight had already begun. "I know what you did," she said quietly. "I know you raised me because my mother couldn't, but that doesn't make me my mother. And now it's time to give me what's mine." The room felt impossibly small. The walls seemed to press in on me. I thought about calling my lawyer, about fighting, about screaming, but nothing would bring back the years I had lived in her trust, in her innocence. I took a step back, my hands open in surrender. I can't give you what you want. I can't give up the memories, the years. I can't give up being your mother." She shook her head, her jaw tight. The girl I knew, my daughter, gone, replaced by someone older, sharper, colder. "That's done," she said. That was the breaking point.
Everything I had protected, everything I had loved, shattered in that single sentence. I wanted to collapse, to cry, to beg, but I didn't. I had to stay upright. I had to breathe. I had to start thinking, not as a mother who had been betrayed, but as a woman who had cared so deeply, who now had to fight not just for her rights, but for the bond we had shared, the heart we had built together. That day marked the end of innocence and the beginning of a battle I had never imagined. I realized that love alone could not shield us from reality, that trust, devotion, and sacrifice, no matter how deep, were invisible, without recognition, without law. And so I promised myself, as I stood in that kitchen with the smell of burnt toast hanging in the air, that I would fight. Not as the mother she wanted me to be recognized as, not for what the law would grant me, but for the truth, for the years we had lived together, for the love she once called mommy, and for the bond that had never faded, even if she no longer saw it. The journey ahead would be long, painful, and uncertain. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would not let 17 years of motherhood, of sacrifice, of love, disappear without a fight.
I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside my window. The silence in the house was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the old pipes felt like a reminder that my life had shifted, irrevocably. By morning, I realized that this wasn't just about inheritance or property. It was about acknowledgement, recognition, validation for 17 years of being a mother in every sense that counted. And suddenly, the thought of fighting legally seemed both urgent and absurd. I loved her, and yet the law could erase that love with a piece of paper. I called my lawyer, Mrs. Hanley, who had been my friend since law school. I explained the situation as quietly as I could, my voice trembling. She's demanding everything. My sister's property, the inheritance. She says I'm not her mother, that legally I don't exist. Mrs. Hanley was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in. I'm so sorry, Maria. This isn't just legal. It's personal. But we need evidence, proof that you raised her, provided for her, loved her. Emails, messages, witnesses, photos, anything. We need to show the court that the bond you built is real, undeniable. I felt a flicker of hope, but also despair. Evidence could show care, but could it ever show the years of scraped knees, sleepless nights, whispered secrets in the dark, the way she used to call me mommy without hesitation? Could it show the nights I held her trembling against my chest when nightmares came? Could a piece of paper prove a heart? I started gathering everything. Old photographs stacked in cardboard boxes in the attic, birthday cards from kindergarten to her 16th birthday, each one signed lovingly by Mommy. School notes, doctor records, immunization cards, all the proof that I had raised her from birth. I even found the baby clothes I had hand-knitted when she was born, and the tiny hospital blanket I had kept folded neatly in a cedar chest. And then the betrayal became concrete. While sorting through the documents, I found a letter from my sister, one I had never seen before. The envelope was yellowed, brittle with age, addressed to me in her familiar, flowing handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. The words inside made my stomach drop. My sister had known. She had planned for this. In the letter, she wrote that if anything happened to her, Lily was to inherit everything. But she also mentioned
casually, almost cruelly, that I had no legal claim to her daughter, that legally I was a caregiver, nothing more. I sank to the floor, the letter clutched to my chest. For 17 years, I had been everything to her, everything, but in the eyes of the law, I was invisible. It wasn't just Lily who had betrayed me by asking for her mother's things. It was fate, circumstance, and even my sister's foresight that left me powerless. All my love, all my care, all those years dismissed by a piece of paper. The first confrontation came when Lily returned from school that day, holding a folder stuffed with her mother's legal documents. She walked into the living room, and her blaze met mine. There was a determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen since she was a little girl learning to ride her bike. "I found everything," she said softly, almost tenderly. "The house, the accounts, the will, and I want you to understand, Mom, I don't need to thank you for raising me. I don't need to acknowledge that you were there. I need my inheritance." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I swallowed them. "Lily, I raised you, loved you, gave you everything, everything I had. And you're turning your back on that? On me?" She didn't flinch. "I'm not turning my back. I'm claiming what's mine." I couldn't breathe. I felt my heart splintering into pieces, sharp and unrelenting. I wanted to scream, to beg, to make her understand, but the words caught in my throat. She was 18. She was legal. And she was resolved. I realized in that moment that love alone could not protect us. The bond we had shared for 17 years, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the whispered fears in the dark, meant nothing in the face of law and inheritance. I was powerless in the world that had defined motherhood not by care and sacrifice, but by papers and signatures. The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined. It was not just that Lily was asking for what was legally hers, it was that the girl who had called me mommy every day for 17 years could now turn and define me as nothing. I had to fight. Not for the property, not for the inheritance, but for recognition. For the truth that our bond was real, that motherhood was more than legality, that 17 years of love could not simply vanish. And so I began the long, painful journey of proving what love alone could never certify. I began to gather witnesses, friends, teachers, neighbors, relatives who had watched me raise Lily. I began to compile evidence of every moment that mattered. Her first steps, her first words, the scraped knees, the nights she had clung to me when storms shook the house. I would fight, not just as a mother in title, but as a woman who had given everything to a child she loved beyond reason. This was the betrayal that would shape the rest of our lives.
The days after Lily's demand felt like wading through thick fog. Every step was heavy. Every movement carried the weight of grief I hadn't fully acknowledged. I had lived in a world where I was invisible to the law, but now that reality pressed down on me like a stone. And yet, for the first time in years, I knew I couldn't hide from it. I had to move. I had to fight. The first step was asking for help. I reached out to friends who had been quietly present in our lives, the ones who had seen me wake at 3 a.m. to feed her, who had watched me patch scraped knees and soothe nightmares. I explained everything, my voice tight and trembling. Some cried with me, others were silent, stunned, but all promised support. Next, I turned back to Mrs. Hanley, my lawyer. She was my anchor in the storm, steady and calm, even as the injustice of it all threatened to consume me. "We're going to build a case," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "Not for the money, not for the inheritance. For the bond you built. For the truth.
You will show the court what motherhood really is." We started gathering evidence. It was painstaking. Photographs, school records, letters, medical records, messages, even the hand-sewn baby clothes I had saved in a cedar chest. Friends and family signed affidavits. Teachers remembered her as the little girl who always spoke of Mommy with a smile. Neighbors recalled birthday parties, sleepovers, and holidays. Every piece was a stitch in a tapestry that could finally prove what I had lived every day of Lily's life, that I had been her mother in every meaningful way. But the hardest part was preparing for the emotional confrontation. I knew Lily didn't see me as her mother anymore. The girl who had clung to me through storms, who had whispered, "I love you, Mommy," at night, now regarded me as an obstacle to her inheritance. I couldn't make her feel the years we had shared, couldn't force her to acknowledge the nights I stayed awake, silently weeping while she slept. I could only show her, through my calm and my dignity, that love doesn't disappear when recognition fails. I also had to confront my own heart. Every night I replayed the betrayal over and over, feeling the jagged edges of heartbreak slice deeper. But slowly I started to realize that anger and sorrow could coexist with love, that to fight for her and for us, I had to be steady. I had to keep my heart open. The legal process began slowly. We filed the necessary documents to assert my claim as the primary caregiver and de facto parent. I attended every meeting, every hearing, every mediation session. I learned to navigate the cold language of the law, a language that could not touch the warmth of our bond, but which I had to master if I wanted to protect it. There were moments of despair. The courtroom felt alien, sterile, and cruel. Papers and procedures seemed to diminish the meaning of 17 years of sleepless nights, endless care, and unconditional love. But there were also moments of hope. Friends came to testify, recounting the details of our lives together. Teachers spoke of Lily's growth under my care. Even distant relatives recalled my constant presence, my unwavering devotion. Piece by piece, the truth was emerging, slowly, carefully. Outside the courtroom, I tried to reconnect with Lily. It was tentative at first. She avoided eye contact, kept her distance, and spoke in clipped sentences. I didn't press. I learned to offer small gestures, making her favorite breakfast, leaving notes on her pillow, quietly attending events she was involved in. I reminded her without words that I was still present, still loving her, that my care didn't vanish because of papers or demands. Friends cautioned me not to expect too much. They said, "She's hurt, confused, and growing up. Give her space." But space didn't feel like enough. I wanted her to understand, to see, to remember the bond that had always been ours. And I realized that I couldn't force her. All I could do was be steady, be patient, and continue to fight, both in the courtroom and in the quiet corners of our everyday life. It took months. Months of filing documents, attending hearings, gathering affidavits, speaking to judges, and navigating bureaucratic delays. Each day was exhausting, emotionally and physically, but slowly the tide began to shift. Witness after witness painted a portrait of our life together, a child raised not by circumstance, but by love, devotion, and sacrifice. The court began to see me not as an outsider, but as the constant, steady presence in Lily's life. And then one afternoon, I received the call I had been waiting for. Mrs. Hanley's voice was calm, but infused with warmth. "Maria, the judge has recognized your role as Lily's primary caregiver. Legally, you have standing. It's not the inheritance itself yet, but it's a recognition of the bond you built. You're not invisible anymore." I sat down, tears streaming down my face, and for the first time in weeks, allowed myself to breathe. Recognition, not vengeance. Truth, not denial. The bond we shared, my years of motherhood, was finally visible in the eyes of the law. The journey had been long, painful, and exhausting. But in that moment, I felt the first flicker of relief, the first breath of hope. Not just for me, but for Lily. Not just for recognition, but for healing. The path ahead would still be challenging. We still had fractures to mend, words to say, and hearts to rebuild. But for the first time, I knew we could face it together.
After the court recognized my role as Lily's primary caregiver, the weight on my chest finally lifted, but only slightly. Recognition alone couldn't heal the hurt or erase the years of tension that had quietly built between us. I still had a daughter who saw me as an obstacle, who measured love in papers and inheritance rather than in nights spent comforting scraped knees or whispering, "I love you" in the dark. I realized that I had to act, not as a mother seeking revenge or validation, but as a woman determined to preserve the bond we had built, to reclaim our relationship from the shadows of betrayal. The first step was reaching out to Lily directly, without lawyers or documents, without mediators or agendas. I sent her a simple note, leaving it on her bedroom dresser. "I am here, always, not because of inheritance or legality, but because I love you. I will never stop." She didn't reply that day. She didn't reply the next. I knew she was processing, trying to figure out whether the woman she had called Mummy for 17 years was still the same person she could trust. So I took small, deliberate actions, quiet gestures that carried no demand. I cooked her favorite meals, I mended her clothes, tucked a blanket over her at night. I left little notes with memories she had forgotten, reminders that our bond existed outside of legal recognition. I wanted her to feel, slowly, steadily, that the love I had always offered was not conditional, transactional, or tied to inheritance. At the same time, I had to defend the life we had built together. When Lily's legal team began to push harder, demanding access to the house and property, I prepared. I went through our documentation again, photos, letters, school records, medical files, everything that could show the depth of our life together. I realized that the fight was no longer just about law, it was about truth. And truth needed to be visible, undeniable. I also sought counsel from people who had been through similar battles. Mothers, guardians, caregivers who had raised children under complicated circumstances. Their stories gave me courage, insight, and a roadmap. One woman told me, "You can't force them to see your love, but you can make it impossible for them to deny it exists." Those words became my mantra. The court hearings were tense. I watched Lily sit across from me, her posture stiff, her gaze guarded. I could see the storm behind her eyes, confusion, frustration, loyalty to her mother's memory, but also faintly the shadow of the little girl who had trusted me completely. Every time the judge asked me to speak, I took a deep breath and spoke calmly, honestly, from the heart. "I did not raise Lily for recognition or inheritance," I said during one hearing. "I raised her because she needed me, because she was my responsibility, because love does not always ask for reward. She has been my world since the moment she was born. And though I cannot change the past, I can testify to the truth of our lives together. 17 years of love, care, and guidance." Witnesses came forward, teachers, neighbors, friends, even a pediatrician who had watched Lily grow from infancy to adolescence. They spoke not in hyperbole, but in careful, honest detail about my constant presence in her life, the role I had played, and the love that defined it. Piece by piece, the narrative of our family, our real, messy, beautiful life, was laid bare for everyone to see. Outside the courtroom, I continued to act gently, persistently, without expectation. I wanted Lily to see that I could love her freely even as she pushed me away. I couldn't force forgiveness, but I could demonstrate patience, consistency, and unwavering care.
Slowly, the small walls she had built around herself began to show cracks. One afternoon, after months of legal proceedings and quiet gestures, I found her sitting on the porch, staring at the old garden we had planted together. I joined her silently, giving her the space she clearly needed. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I I don't know if I can ever see you the same way again. I didn't respond immediately. I just reached out, gently, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, hesitant, but she didn't pull away. I know, I said softly. I understand, and I will wait. I will always be here. Not because of inheritance, not because of the law, but because I love you. That doesn't change. She squeezed my hand lightly, a small gesture, but monumental. It was the first acknowledgement since that fateful morning that our bond could survive the storm. From that point on, my actions became a balance between patience and presence, legal defense and emotional connection. I didn't fight to take something from her. I fought to preserve what we had already built. I fought to ensure that 17 years of love, trust, and care were not erased. It was not an easy road. There were days when I doubted myself, when the cold glare of legality felt like it would consume me, when I questioned whether love alone was enough. But every small gesture, every quiet breakfast, every shared story, every moment she allowed me into her life again reaffirmed that I was not invisible, that our bond, though strained, still existed. And slowly I began to realize that this journey wasn't just about fighting for what I had given, it was about showing Lily that love could survive betrayal, disappointment, and legal technicalities. That motherhood at its heart is not measured in papers or inheritance, but in the constancy of care, the quiet presence, the years spent giving without expectation.
The news of the legal battle eventually reached the edges of our community. People whispered, of course, some with sympathy, others with judgment. How could she let a child call her mummy all those years and then not be recognized? One neighbor asked. Another said, she should have known the law doesn't see love. I tried to ignore it. For 17 years, I had lived quietly, devotedly, without seeking attention or applause. But now, the story of my invisible motherhood was public. And strangely, it mattered. Friends and colleagues reached out with encouragement. We see what you've done, they said. We know who Lily's mother truly is. Teachers and neighbors echoed the sentiment. Even strangers wrote messages of support after reading an article in the local paper. Their words were a balm to the wounds that the legal and emotional battles had left. But it wasn't just external validation I needed. It was the impact on Lily. I knew she was watching, learning, and processing. I could feel the tension whenever we walked through town or ran errands together. People would glance, nod knowingly, and I could see her shrink slightly under their gaze. I didn't force conversation about it. I let her come to understanding in her own time. There were moments when the public attention became too much. One day, while walking through the park, someone recognized me and approached. You're the woman who raised Lily, right? The one fighting for her? I nodded politely, careful not to say too much in front of Lily. She looked up at me, surprised and embarrassed, but I whispered gently, it's okay. People will see the truth. And slowly, they did. The story of our lives, years of care, sleepless nights and devotion, was no longer invisible. The community, once silent, now acknowledged the truth. It wasn't just legal recognition anymore. It was social recognition. People began to understand what motherhood truly meant beyond documents and inheritance: presence, sacrifice, and unwavering love. This recognition affected Lily too. Over time, I noticed her demeanor change subtly. She no longer avoided my gaze in public. She would sometimes walk beside me, her shoulder brushing mine, a small silent gesture of connection. The cold formality that had dominated our interactions began to thaw. The legal victory, modest but significant, combined with public acknowledgement, created a new dynamic.
Lily began to realize on her own that our relationship wasn't defined by papers or inheritance. It was defined by years of shared life, of care, and of love that had weathered betrayal. Even my sister's memory was part of the conversation. Friends and family reminded Lily that her mother had loved us both and had, in some ways, trusted me to guide her. I didn't push these reminders, but they became part of the backdrop of our healing, a quiet truth that gave both of us perspective. I learned that recognition, both legal and social, was not about revenge or punishment. It was about truth and visibility. It was about ensuring that love, effort, and sacrifice was seen even when someone else tried to erase them. And slowly, with each acknowledgement, with each small act of care that Lily allowed, we began to rebuild what had been broken. By the time the community fully recognized the bond between us, Lily began to open up more at home. Conversations became warmer. Small gestures of affection, squeezes of the hand, a shared smile, the quiet thank you for breakfast started to fill the spaces that had been cold and tense for months. The public consequence, I realized, was not punishment for Lily or for me. It was understanding, acknowledgement, and a shared awareness that truth and love cannot be completely hidden. It forced both of us to confront the reality of what had happened, and in doing so, allowed the slow work of reconciliation to begin. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief that was more than legal. It was emotional. The recognition wasn't perfect. It didn't erase all pain or betrayal, but it made visible the invisible. And that visibility was the first step toward healing for me, for Lily, and the life we had worked so hard to build together.
The months that followed were slow but steady. Lily and I began to navigate a new rhythm, one built on honesty, patience, and cautious trust. The legal recognition and the public acknowledgement had opened doors, but the real work, the emotional repair, was ours alone. I started by reclaiming small rituals we had once shared, quietly, without fanfare. Saturday mornings became our time again. We would bake bread together, the smell of yeast and flour filling the kitchen, our hands dusted with white powder as we laughed over spilled dough. At night, we would sit on the porch, sipping tea, talking about anything and everything, from her college plans to the books she was reading. Slowly, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. One evening, she brought out a box of old drawings she had made as a child. "I found these in the attic," she said, her voice soft. You kept them all." She looked at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen since she was little. I smiled, brushing a tear from my cheek. "I kept everything. Every memory, every piece of you. I couldn't help it." She hugged me tightly, and I felt the years of tension and misunderstanding melt away. It was not instant forgiveness, not even a full reconciliation, but it was the first true connection in months, the first acknowledgement that we were still mother and daughter in the ways that mattered most. Healing, I realized, was not about erasing the past. It was about building on it. We talked about the hurt, the betrayal, the sense of invisibility I had felt for years. She listened, sometimes tearfully, sometimes silently, and I listened too, understanding that she had been shaped by loss as much as love. We grieved together, slowly untangling the knots of pain that had bound us. I also took time to heal myself, to reclaim the parts of me that had been submerged in fear and sorrow. I returned to old hobbies, began volunteering, and connected with friends who reminded me of life beyond the struggle. I learned that self-care was not selfish, and that to be present for Lily, I had to nurture my own heart. We talked about the future, the house, the inheritance, and the legacy of her mother. I explained gently that while she could have access to certain things, the home we had shared would always be a space of love and belonging, not just a possession. She began to understand that motherhood and family were not defined by what we owned, but how we lived together, how we cared for each other, and how we endured hardships as a unit.
The most profound moment came on her 18th birthday, a full year after the initial confrontation. She walked into the kitchen, carrying a small envelope. I wanted to give you this, she said, placing it on the counter. Inside was a handwritten note, not from her mother's estate, not tied to inheritance, but from her heart. Mom, I see you. I know now what it means to be a mother, not in law, not in paper, but in heart. I'm sorry for doubting, for demanding. Thank you for never giving up on me, for loving me when I didn't know how to accept it. I love you. I could barely breathe. I hugged her until we both trembled, the years of pain and misunderstanding folding into a quiet, shared relief. That note, small and simple, carried more weight than any legal victory ever could. It was acknowledgement, recognition, and love, pure and untainted. In that moment, I understood the true meaning of motherhood. It wasn't about titles, inheritance, or legal documents. It was about presence, sacrifice, patience, and unwavering care. It was about loving someone even when they rejected you, even when they couldn't see you, even when the world didn't recognize your devotion. The house, the legal battles, the whispers of the community, they faded into the background. What remained was the bond between Lily and I, tested but unbroken. And slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild a relationship that was stronger than before. I also took time to help others in similar situations. I shared my story quietly, offering guidance to caregivers and mothers who face the invisibility of law and circumstance. I learned that by speaking my truth, I could provide strength and hope to others navigating the same storm. Years from that point, when I look back, I see a journey that was painful, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. I raised a child as my own, faced betrayal, fought for recognition, and emerged with something deeper than any inheritance: the understanding that love, devotion, and care are never invisible. They leave marks on the heart that no legal document can erase. Lily and I still have moments of tension, of misunderstanding, as any mother and adult daughter do, but the foundation has changed. We talk openly, laugh together, cry together, and remember the years we shared. We honor her mother's memory while embracing the love we built ourselves. I am no longer invisible. I am seen, not just by the law, not just by the community, but by the person whose heart I have carried in mind since the day she was born. And in that, I have found my peace.
Sometimes I still sit quietly in the evenings, listening to the soft hum of the house, and I think about the years that brought us here. The sleepless nights, the whispered fears, the small victories, and the deep betrayals. I think about how easy it is to be erased in the eyes of the law, even when you've given everything of yourself to another human being. And yet, love has a way of leaving its mark, even when the world doesn't notice. It doesn't show up in documents or accounts. It shows up in scraped knees mended in the dark, in whispered reassurances, in breakfast plates left on the table, in the quiet insistence that someone is never truly alone. Lily and I have rebuilt our bond, piece by piece. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but it is real. And in that reality, I have found something no legal battle could ever give me: a sense of belonging, recognition, and the knowledge that love, true love, cannot be erased. I shared this story because I know there are others out there, unseen, who have poured themselves into someone else's life, only to feel invisible when the world, or even their own family, refuses to recognize it. I want you to know, your care matters, your sacrifices matter, and even if the world doesn't see it, the hearts you touch carry your love forever. So I ask you softly, as I look back on my journey, would you have done what I did?
Would you have fought not for inheritance, not for recognition, but for love? If this story touched your heart, share it. And remember the quiet, relentless power of love that persists even in the face of betrayal.